Welcome to Parent Tech, where we interview the people building and analyzing the technology that our families and kids use. I'm Andrew Hogan, dad and tech analyst, and my guest today is Ash Brandin, gamer educator on Instagram, and the author of an upcoming book called Power On. Thanks for coming on, Ash.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited. I've been following you for a while, and I just am really pumped to chat. And I love the title of the book, Power On. It's so good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Power On, managing screen time to benefit the whole family. So hopefully it can help people do just that.
I think it probably will. So you have already been giving advice and perspective to 230,000 people on Instagram, and you have been a teacher for almost 15 years. You've got this book coming up. What do you hope that people are going to walk away from the book with?
I often think that the fact that I am a teacher in my day job is really what allows me to do what I do for families online, because a huge part of what I do is to basically take things that I know from the education world, whether it's understanding what's going on from like a development or psychological perspective, or if it's like the tips of the trade that come from being an educator, where with things like classroom management or behavior management or helping scaffold kids through the skill building of life skills that might show up in their lives, whether that's technology or not, and then applying those things to technology in ways that can help families at home. And so if I weren't an educator in my day job, I don't think that this could exist, because that's a huge part of what fuels it. So I hope that families are able to realize that there's so many options available for them beyond all or nothing. That it doesn't have to be a Pandora's box of we open it and we allow it all. And it also doesn't have to be abstinence and we have to cut everything off. That there is a middle ground, and that middle ground can also work with you to be what you need it to be. And that by putting some of these systems in place, in many ways not dissimilar to what a teacher does in a classroom, we can find ways to make this work for us so that it can also work for our kids as they grow up into adulthood. So I hope that families just feel like it's practical and actionable and realistic for them and for their kids.
Yeah, you use the word systems, and I love that framing. I've gotten some of that framing from educators that I know really well. I know like structures for when screen time is good and acceptable. Are there a couple systems that like really come to mind for you that you think people should know, or ways that they should be thinking about this so that they're not on this, no screen time at all, ever. And also you can do everything you want. We don't even pay attention.
Right. Well, yeah. So my book kind of is in these big three sections, and the first is what I call unlearning and reframing, because we really can't even. I know people want like an answer. They're like, just tell me what to do, but we really can't do that if first we are coming at it from a place of, okay, but screens are bad and they should never be doing them. And if we're coming from that framing, we won't be able to implement some of what comes later because of our worldview. And so first we have to kind of reframe that. And from then I get into a second part where we're really talking about what I call the ABCs of screen time. And it's the areas where whatever your pain point is, it's probably coming from one of these three things. And those are access, behavior, and content. And like one of those things or a combination thereof is probably what is contributing to a given issue. And then once we're able to really parse out, like, how do I decide what the underlying root cause is, then we get into actually making like a system and structure that can work for a family. And in that section, I call it making nice rules. And because those rules and boundaries should incorporate needs, like the needs of a family, input, meaning like input from like our kids, our family. They need to be consistent, and they also need to be enforceable and enforced. And so really talking about like, what does that really look like? And that it's not good or bad if my need is I need my kids to be occupied and quiet so I can, finish up my work for the day. If that's the need, it's not good or bad. That's just the need. Okay, now given that, what input can I give my kids? How can I make sure this is consistent so that they aren't constantly begging for it, but I can also know that I can keep up my end of the bargain? And then how can I make sure that I am able to enforce it in a way that's sustainable? Because some families can give lots of warning, some families can be flexible, and some families, their screen time might be, right before they're walking out of the door in the morning, and they're like, I can't, it actually has to be really firm. So
Mm-hmm.
the system itself might be different in terms of how it gets implemented between different families. And that's part of the point, is that it's not, we don't want to fit ourselves to a mold. We want to fit that to us. So if we understand the parts of what will make this really sustainable, then we're able to make it work for us, and it can grow and change as we need it to grow and change.
It's really one of the things I think about when you say the ABCs, access, behavior, content. Um, I think about how that does change. I have a 4-year-old, and our needs at 2 were different than our needs now, and her sort of orientation to screens is different now. We also, things are less shut down than they were at that point in time.
Totally.
But I also have had conversations with people who have kids that are 9 or 10, and their needs and their, I imagine, ABCs, just to use your framing, are
Right.
wildly different.
Absolutely. And in some ways, it can seem like, oh, well, the issues that my child might, like the pain point might be completely different when they're 2 or 4 or 8 or 12. And sometimes it actually might be the same. It just might be showing up or manifesting itself like differently, like just presenting differently. And that's, I think, another thing that comes from more of an education background, is being able sometimes to zoom out and remove what we think the issue is. Like when families are sometimes coming to me and saying, like, my the problem is the screen, they won't turn it off, or it's causing this issue. Sometimes I'll say, well, actually, how would you think of it if we took the screen out of it? Right. And it can feel really hard to do that, but sometimes if we can take the trigger out of the situation, what we're left with often is an underlying skill or a skill deficit. And so, a kid who is 4 and might, protest or have feelings when the parent takes the iPad away, and a 14-year-old who is procrastinating and who is, staying up super late because they can't turn it off. Well, those might actually be very similar in terms of what's going on. That might be about their access to the device and how
Yeah.
that is getting enforced. And so when we're able to come back to that and say, actually, these are kind of the same underlying thing. So what's the skill? Is the skill being able to stop in the middle of something fun? Because actually, that is the same skill for that 4-year-old and that 14-year-old. I'm going to teach it differently, right, when they're 4 and they're 14. But it is still the same, maybe potentially the same underlying skill. And the reason I like coming back to that is because it takes some of the heaviness out of it. If we see our kid and we feel like, oh, well, it's just because they don't want to get off the screen, then it puts us in a place of feeling pretty bad, like about ourselves. Like, well, I let them do it, so it's my fault, right?
Mhm.
But if we're able to look at it and say, okay, this is an application of this skill that is hard. Well, I do want them to be able to stop in the middle of fun things because
Yeah.
responsibility calls, right? Whether that is being on the phone or watching TV or playing with a friend or whatever, I want them to practice that skill. And looking at it that way sometimes can take some of that yucky judgment out of it, which I think could be really helpful.
Are there other skills like that? Because I love this idea of like deconstructing the situation. What are the different parts of it? Thinking about what skill are they maybe have a deficit in, or would maybe need to practice on. Are there others that are kind of in that frame, so I can so parents can think about that?
I think many are. I made an analogy recently in a post where I don't talk very much about smartphones just because that like should be someone's entire, that should be all that they're talking about. But I made a post recently saying, like, if you're wondering, is my kid ready for a smartphone, and insert anything here, right? Is my kid ready to play video games? Is my kid ready for a tablet, etc.? Stop thinking about phones and start thinking about bicycles. making the same sort of comparison of like I mean, I don't, maybe some people do, but at least for me, like when I look at a bike or when I looked at a bike and my kid couldn't ride one, my first thought was not about the danger, right? My first thought was about like the skill. But when people look at a smartphone or they conceive of the idea of giving their kid one, they're often thinking immediately about the danger. Like, well, I can't do that because then, insert all these things that we're worried about here. And I'm not saying they're not valid, they are. But also, when my kid was 3 and I looked at a bike, I didn't think, well, they could get hit by a car and they could fall off, they could hit their head. Instead, I thought, like, this is something I want them to be able to do. What are the skills that they need and how do I build them? And so I think that we can apply that to many things. So it might be if my kid is wanting to play like a social game where they might be communicating with other people, then that might be a conversation of, does my child know like how to speak to someone that they don't know, right? Speaking to someone new, or do they know what kinds of things are okay to say out loud and what needs to be kept in your head? Do they know information that's okay to share with strangers and what isn't okay to share with strangers? And do they know that that's the same, like online versus real life? It's still the idea of like, what information should I share? Does my child know what to do if they hear something unsafe, whether that is in the cafeteria or on the playground or at soccer or when they play Fortnite? If it's something like giving a child more autonomy or a teen more autonomy over their time, right, and not micromanaging their time, then that skill might be time management, right? Do they have ways of managing their own time in their life? And what are other ways that we can embed that besides just screens so that they're practicing that skill in many parts of their life?
Yeah. So there's an intentionality, sort of break the situation down, think about goals, and then create some intentionality around what would make it, what would make your kids successful and help them to have skills that are maybe transferable to other places is a lot of what I'm hearing here. I was going to ask you about smartphones. You sort of said in passing, like that's a whole separate, that should be someone's whole other. Tell me more
Yeah.
about that. Like, not to make this the whole thing. Like that was what you said you explicitly didn't want to do. But tell me more about what is in there. What is in all of that? Because that is a huge topic around parent technology.
Absolutely. Really, what I mean is that I think a lot of the things that I talk about absolutely apply to smartphones. And I think because honestly, a lot of what I'm talking about at the end of the day is digital literacy and is
Yeah.
digital safety. And that applies kind of regardless of the technology. I think a lot of it is, if we think about just applying it to a smartphone, would still apply, and many parents could just take that information and use it as it applies to smartphones. And I think that it feels like such a third rail to many
Yeah.
people that I think that probably it warrants having that be like the sole focus. And I thankfully, like, I don't talk much about social media because although I would argue that many video games actually do function as social media, it's not the same as the sort of algorithmic app social media that is going to be more common on a smartphone. And so that I don't really get into as much just because it doesn't come up as often in the world of video games, at least not in the same way.
So a great deal of complexity. Like you said, there's some unlearning and relearning that has to happen. And often we usually have to confront our own sort of relationship with these different technologies in ways that my last guest described as some of it's a little hypocritical because we are often on these things more than maybe we want. Why are you so passionate about this? Because I also even detect like you need people to know about these things. I get that sense. And I mean that in like the best possible way. I feel it in the posts. I feel it in this conversation. I feel it in the advice. I want to read the book. Why are you so into this?
So I ended up in this place in a unique way, which was like through education. And I was working in my own classroom. At the time, I was teaching. I started as a music teacher, as an orchestra teacher, and then I've taught core subjects after that. Now I'm a librarian. So I've kind of had these different perspectives. I grew up with video games as just a part of my life, and I really didn't think about it. Like
Yeah.
they were just a thing I did. And I did them and I did other things. And, I played the violin and I would, you know, make like crafts and fold origami and watch TV and play video games. And to me, those were like all equal in terms of their value and, you know, ranking them. It's like these are all hobbies. They all are kind of equal morality. And I think that's probably how many kids feel, right? These are all things I enjoy. And I just didn't think that that was unique at all. Like, I mean, you don't always know, right? You have your own perspective. And when I was an early teacher, like a young teacher, I was doing my master's degree, and that was in the height of like the Guitar Hero rock band craze era, which like definitely dates me to a certain time period. And I thought like, well, actually this is so interesting because the way that those games teach you how to play them, because they are teaching you, right? Like you can't go out and
Hmm.
play guitar, but like they are teaching you how to play
Yeah.
the game. The way that those games teach is actually very similar to how I would teach and many people would teach beginning string players. Like we use colors, we're talking about kind of reading ahead. And I thought, oh, well, actually, I bet a lot of like orchestra teachers, like, how amazing is this? They're taking something as dry as like orchestral pedagogy, right? And they've managed to make it like really digestible and something that many kids would be dying to do. I bet that some teachers are like using this even as a supplement, even though it's commercial off the shelf, because it would probably get kids really into it. And that's when I started looking to see examples of that and found like absolutely nothing, which didn't mean it wasn't happening. It just wasn't getting published about. And if I did see anything, it was like, I remember opening up this magazine for educators, like music educators. And it was like, the article literally was like, what is a Nintendo Wii? And this was like 2007. And I remember thinking like, oh no, like either people really are this disconnected or the sort of big E educational conglomerate thinks that people are this disconnected. And I thought, well, I know I enjoy this. I know my students might enjoy this. How do I make my classroom feel like this? And the longer I've done this, the longer I realized that it was just a more unique view than I realized. And that sometimes my ability to have some of that neutrality and just reframe it in different ways is a way that can help other people and empower other people. And I think as an educator, I mean, that's what I want to do, right? Like, I want to empower people to be able to have a skill they didn't have or improve their lives in some way. If I can do that in a different venue than just a classroom, I mean, that's a joy.
Yeah. Uh, I asked that question because I, in general, caught a lot of similar. I played a lot of World of Warcraft. I played a lot of EverQuest. I played a lot of different RTSs and Civilization and SimCity. Like you could just run down the list. And every one of those things taught me a bunch of skills that I use today. They were not wastes of time. And I don't think it was anything really that unique about the games. It's something that I think, I mean, I worked on how to be good at them. So that's also something that's useful. And I just appreciated your general sort of neutral view of if this is something that kids enjoy, what is it that's good about it? I saw your post about maybe kids who are neurodivergent having more success in some video games because there's, wayfinding and there's, things are broken up. The quests aren't these long, totally disconnected tasks that we do now. They're broken up into chunks. And I agree with you. I think this is a unique view that is partially you're drawing a view into by almost breaking it down, analyzing it in its component parts. Because I don't know if that many people think that hard about games and game construction. It seems like a valuable thing for a parent to think about if we want to be intentional.
I think absolutely. And again, it also comes back to that place of we first have to be able to come to the table and say, this thing is valid. Like this interest of theirs is valid. And that doesn't mean like sometimes when I say that, people will say, but it's not as good as, and I'm like, I'm not saying that it's the thing we want them to do all the time,
Yeah.
right? But it is valid to have leisure and to do things for enjoyment just because you enjoy them. And we have a very, like, in my opinion, we have like a very capitalist view of leisure where it's like it's okay to do something leisurely, but only if it's productive, right? Like you're allowed to be leisurely if you are improving yourself or creating something, but not if you are like literally just having leisure for the sake of leisure and like playing a video game to have fun.
I mean, but you're describing actually how it is actually still probably developing skills, assuming the C and the ABCs. The C is actually maybe important in that. Is that actually a fair read of what you're saying? Like thinking about which games or what kinds of games are important, or is that misunderstanding some of the framework?
I think it can be. It kind of also comes down to what's your purpose too, right? Like if my purpose is like if my need is like I need my kid occupied,
Yeah,
like
it's true.
frankly, to put it really plainly, if it's I need my kid to be quiet and convenient right now because
Yeah.
I am like fully engrossed in like if right now my spouse is home right now, and if that were not the case, right now I would need my kid to be like quiet and convenient and contained, right? And so if I were using a screen for that, they would not be playing certain games right now because that those sometimes those games need my intervention, like they break or something goes wrong or they're but sometimes it's also like because it's more dysregulating, right?
Yeah.
And if I need them to be like kind of quiet and safe, then that might be a time I'm utilizing like TV or something that keeps their attention or focus in a more sustainable way. And sometimes that might be educational content, and sometimes it might not be because even though it's really enriching or they have a really great time when they're playing, it might just also be less predictable, if that makes sense. What I'm talking about content is often is more about really getting into the nitty gritty of like what makes content better or worse, which is, really can be really nuanced. And also what content can be potentially problematic or a bit insidious in structure that we might need to be looking out for that I think many caregivers may not always realize right away. I think gamers are probably more likely to realize it because we are versed in some of the language of games. But I
Loot
think that
boxes, levels, those are,
exactly
yeah.
anything. Well, yeah, and so it's like free to play games in
Bosses.
general.
Oh, yeah.
Oh
That's a
yeah,
whole,
I'm sure definitely bosses, but especially with things like free to play games, is that when
yeah.
parents ask me about something like Fortnite, what they will always say is I'm worried about the guns, and I'm like that is not the reason to be worried about Fortnite. Like, I mean, in my opinion, anyway, like the guns are not like in the top five things that I would be thinking about if I'm thinking about Fortnite. I'm thinking more about structure. I'm thinking about incentivization to play and log in. I'm thinking about user created content more and more in platforms like Roblox and Fortnite, but also, things that are free to play, they motivate very differently. When you're talking about playing these open world simulators when you were a kid, I am very much not that kind of gamer. I find that extremely overwhelming. Like, just give me a quest and tell me to go, and then I'm happy, having a great time. But either of those examples, for either of us, what were we feeling? We were feeling things like skill and power and control. Maybe we were relating to other people, maybe not, because we were very isolated in those gaming experiences in the 90s and the 2000s. You were feeling a lot of intrinsic motivation. We want to keep doing it because we're feeling good at it. We enjoy this thing. I feel the same thing when I'm hiking. I felt the same thing when I was learning the violin, right? But if a free to play game does not want you to be intrinsically motivated, because if we're intrinsically motivated, we're playing it because we enjoy it, and that's the main reason. If you are able to play a free to play game for free and enjoy it on its own sake, then they are running a terrible business model because they will go out of business, right? So they actually don't want you to feel intrinsically motivated. They instead want to extrinsically motivate, and they're gearing players' attention toward payment.
Can we break that down a little bit more for people?
Yeah.
You and I are both
Yeah.
gamers, so I think we both know kind of what we're talking about here. Are you
Sure.
talking about they need you to buy different objects to progress in the game or to level up, or are there other mechanics there that parents should know about?
I think that it depends. And that's something I do get into in my content chapter in the book because, some free to play games, it's, hey, you can play this for free and we're going to show you a static ad every like 30 minutes, but otherwise it's the same. Or you can pay us $6 and then the ads will go away and it's otherwise the same functionality. That's wildly different even though it's technically free to play, than a game that, as Fortnite used to do anyway, makes it so that paid players and non-paid players have very different experiences.
Yeah.
So that's very different, right? So if a game is incentivizing me to log in every day, right? If it's saying like, oh, you logged in today, you get 10 coins. If you log in tomorrow, you'll get 15 coins. Well, that immediately is making my hairs raise, because immediately I'm thinking, well, what's their focus on now? Their focus now is not on how they did or how they felt. Now their focus is on, I have to log in tomorrow. And that sounds a lot like gambling, because that's very similar psychologically, right? It's not about what did I accomplish, it's about what will I get. And that isn't necessarily something that I want them to get out of an experience playing games, right? I want them to have a positive experience. And I think focusing on what you'll get if you log in tomorrow is not necessarily that kind of same positive experience. So that could be one. You mentioned loot boxes, which are increasingly like not available. They're decreasingly common because many places in the world have banned them. We have not banned them, but I think other places have. It becomes harder to have them at all. But loot boxes are essentially like, I mean, they're like slot machines. It's like, here buy this item, and it is mystery item, and it could be the best item in the game, and it could be nothing, right? And you could draw the comparison to like, you can see those kinds of toys available sometimes, of like mystery box toys that you can buy in the store. But this is like promising, a certain amount of like clout also, that like your friends would see it or other players would see it, or it would make you better, and you get further in the game. So those kinds of mechanics can obviously be very problematic. And then paid items, it kind of depends. The paid items now in Fortnite, in Roblox, in Minecraft they do not make you better. Like, they make it clear that they do not
So
give
it's
you
all
an
what's referred to as
advantage.
cosmetic.
Right. It would be cosmetic, but there's still many reasons that kids would want to do that. And a lot of it is the
Right.
social. A lot of it
Right.
is like, well, I bought this rare item, or I bought this thing that might will make my friend laugh. Right. And sometimes that's fine. Right. Like, I would, buy something that's like a silly tchotchke that I would lose interest in as a kid. And it's like a plastic trinket. Okay. So some of that you might be able to embed in like economic literacy of like, hey, if this is what you want to spend your money on,
Sure.
okay, and you're going to learn. But some of it can be more problematic if it's driving kids to log in for the sake of logging in.
Sure. I mean, I had not thought about the change in incentives for gaming from when, we were kids. You buy the game once and then you play it for an extended period of time. It doesn't update. It is just the game. And then eventually you move on to another game and you play it as much as you were going to play it. And even like World of Warcraft was a distinctly different experience than prior games, but it also was, you were paying per month. It was a different. This seems like a big key for parents to understand, like the exact mechanics of how these games make money, and maybe even like the sort of social structures that the kids are involved with
Yeah.
within the
I do
games.
think
How do
I
you
do think
how do you do
that's
that
oh
as a
sorry.
parent?
How do you understand it?
Yeah,
Well, I think I mean, how do you understand? Well, arguably, that's like why I exist on a platform that I have, is
that's true.
because it's
That's true.
hard.
That is actually true. I saw like what does a 5-year-old see on Roblox is a real video that I watched and
Oh, yeah.
learn things about
And
that
that's one of my better
experience.
performing ones, because the ones I do that I frankly don't always like that kind of content, because I think it can be very clickbaity. And I do think there is a realistic component there too, of many people just don't
Yeah.
know. I've done a similar one with YouTube Kids, and I really like YouTube Kids if you make it work for you. But on a default setting, it's very similar. So yeah, those kinds of content, they do well. So how, if families are able to, I think, and I assume you would feel similar, but I guess I'll see. I think it can be so powerful to, if you're not going to play the game with your kid, which I completely understand, because like you might just need to get stuff done, downloading it and attempting to play it at all, I think is
Yeah.
really, really informative. if there's a demo, the world of demos is kind of not as much a thing anymore. But if there's a demo or if it's a app that you can download, I mean, if you download the app and you open it and, you make your child's account for them, and the first thing it does is say, here's your coins for today and come back tomorrow, right? Then you might be like, oh, okay, right? If immediately it's talking about, finding friends and connecting with people, well, that might also tell you, oh, this is really socially driven. Am I okay with that? Right? If that's a red flag and you're just not okay with that right now because it's not something that you're willing to manage, which is totally valid, then that tells you all you need to know. And it's like, okay, this is a no right now, at least for now.
Yeah.
And then that can go back to that thing of like, okay, is this something I want to protect them from because it's not something that they would be able to safely engage with? Or is this a skill that they could build? And if it is a skill they could build, then maybe I'm saying yes with certain parameters, right? Maybe it's yes if I'm around, right? Or yes if I'm playing with you. Or maybe it's yes, but I am setting the settings really like granularly to make sure that, you're only viewable to friends or you can only talk to people in real life. And I'm keeping really close tabs on that. But that's the kind of stuff that's simpler to find if you are logging in and looking,
Sure.
and is harder if you aren't. I also find that sites like Common Sense Media can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Not so much with like the settings standpoint, but at least with content, they are more granular than just like it gets a G or a PG or a age 8 or whatever. They will do ratings like, what kind of violence is it? Is it cartoon violence? Is there language? Like instead of just, oh, did they curse? It might be like, oh, there's put downs or there's bullying or there's this kind of play fighting or whatever. And I think that can be really helpful for families. And that's another reason I think having kids play in a room that you can have some amount of surveillance over, even if it's just like having an ear open to what's going on, can also be helpful too. Because then that's all information, right? If every time my kid plays a certain game, they're always talking a certain way, or it's very trash talky, or it's like, wow, it's really just the energy skyrockets. That's information. And then maybe that's something to follow up on, or maybe it's just, okay, when we have to get out the door right away, I can't have you playing this game because it's harder to stop. It's all valid information.
Yeah. So watch your kid play, try to play with them some, maybe try to help, create your own account or create their account with them. And then, like you said, sort of build information model of, what are the incentives here? How does this seem to make them feel? How does it make me feel when they do, different things? Feels like there's this word intentionality that has come up a lot in this work that I've been doing here where I interview people and we talk about this. Do you actually think at this point that it's actually now something we as parents should intentionally introduce games to our children so that we can have these conversations with them about, incentives, social interactions in games? Mm-hmm. Is it almost better for us to be front-footed about it than to sort of just let it happen naturally?
Well, I mean, depends on what the letting it happen naturally looks like. But I would say my short answer is yes, but my slightly longer answer, that doesn't mean that I'm like, put your kid in front of a tablet when they're, as young as possible. That's not what I mean. I think an age where it's going to be something that you are willing to manage, right? Enforce boundaries around, then okay. Then maybe that's the time if it's serving a purpose for you all. But I think with anything that can be a potential vice, that can be problematic, and that could be tech, but that, I mean, frankly, it can be many, many things, right? That can be food, that can be drugs and alcohol, that can be like sexual relationships, that can be exercise. I mean, there can be so many things, right? There's so many things that our relationship to that thing can be balanced and healthy and positive.
Yeah, I mean, we all choose how many cookies our kids eat. So it is, well,
actually, I think that's interesting.
Maybe I shouldn't have made that assumption.
Well, because that's where we see things like the model that's called division of responsibility, which is when I come back to a lot, the work of Ellen Satter. And she talks about that, parents have a job and their job is to decide what is served and when.
Yeah.
And kids decide how much to eat of what's available. And they also decide how to feel about what's being served. And I come back to that model a lot because I think it's really helpful of like an adult decides what content is available and when and for how long when it comes to
Mhm.
technology. And a child decides what to do within that time and content that is allowed. And I think this is an important part that we sometimes forget, and their job is also to have feelings about it, right?
Yeah.
And and the reality is they are really good at that particular part of their job. Right? They're so good
Excellent.
at it.
There.
They probably could move on. They've probably mastered it by now, right? um, but that's something I hear when sometimes families will say like, but if I let my kid choose between playing video games and going outside, they're going to choose video games every time. And I think, okay, and who is giving them those options? And my kid and I were just on a road trip, and we were, I was the only adult. And I had a lot of moments where I found myself looking around and thinking, like, who is the adult in charge? And then, like, having the horrible realization that it was still me, right? There's moments where I'm like, oh my God, someone just come in and make decisions, right? It stinks to have to be the one that has to do all that boundary enforcement, right? It gets old, it gets tiring. But if we're going to give our kids options and one of them is you can have cookies, right, for a snack, if they choose cookies, well, they're holding up their end of the bargain. And for us to then get mad they chose cookies is a little like, well, you told them they could have cookies. And that can also apply to things like tech. So when it comes to vice, things that we can have a potentially problematic relationship with, we have a lot of evidence that abstinence only education doesn't work particularly well. And I think that that is true with technology as well, meaning that if we choose abstinence, then someone else is going to educate them about that thing, right? They will encounter it somewhere at some point. And if that is through someone else, then that means that that person, whether or not we like it, has now essentially become in charge of their onboarding to whatever that thing is, right?
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
and if it is just our kid figuring it out, right? I that also is putting the responsibility on our kid in the future to bear the brunt of educating themselves on this thing. And I think that that isn't necessarily a fair thing to do, but I think also we lose a lot of our ability to have control and guide that conversation. And it can be scary, it feels scary, but education about a thing is not the same as condoning that thing, right? We educate our kids about many things because we want them to have caution or understanding about why it is off limits or important or potentially dangerous. And I think including that with technology allows us to start that conversation so that it can keep going and they can change as they grow older. And if we want them to come to us when something feels unsafe, online or in the real world, they first have to be able to come to us when something does feel safe. And
Yeah.
so if they can't come to us to celebrate what they finished building in Minecraft because they're worried we're going to say it's a waste of time, then if their friend says something to them when they're playing a game that makes them really uncomfortable, they might feel hesitant to come to us, right? So starting from that neutral place, it sets us up to have not only like a more successful way of managing it, but also to have that open communication with our kids, which I think is really important.
So I would love to hear from you, like some good ways of introducing games or like a new style of game potentially, and then maybe some approaches when kids seem to be too into a game. They're almost like opposite ends of the spectrum. In one case, I'm thinking about Mario Kart with my daughter. Like, should I get her into that? How should we do that? And then in another case, I had a conversation with someone whose kid's 9 or 10. They're like way too into Zelda. We need to, reduce the Zelda time. So, like, talk to me about those two different situations.
Those are great. I love those questions. So introducing, I am definitely different than I think many people in that I think age ratings are informative, but I think that they are just one metric. Obviously, if a game is, rated M for mature because it's has really adult content, that's a very different thing. But my child's first console video game was Forza Horizon 4, which
I mean, that's a solid game. There's driving. It seems great.
oh yeah, it's a solid game, but like for people who are not familiar, I mean, my kid was 4, and this is not a game intended for children. It is like sort of a driving simulator, right?
Yeah.
And it is definitely one that tends to get an older audience. And the reason that my kid ended up playing it was because if we tried to show my child anything that was more age appropriate, in quotes, right, easier to do and more forgiving, my child's response, because they were very, very car obsessed at the time, very interested in cars, their response was, "I want to drive a McLaren." And I was like, okay, I get it, right? This like cartoonish animated thing. You're like, no, I want a real car. And so, their first game that they played was Forza Horizon 4. And because they wanted to drive a real car. And well, you know what? That actually ended up being a really positive experience for them. So interest, I think, is huge. And obviously, like what you have available to you, right? If you have an N64, great, use the N64. There are definitely some things that are easier with modern consoles, but I don't think that means that you need to go out and buy one necessarily. Like use what you have. Think about what interests them and think about the kinds of activities that they like. So if they are someone who likes, kind of just freely creating, right? They are the kid who dumps the Lego out and is making whatever. Doing something that's super objectively driven might not really help work for them. They might feel kind of overly controlled and constrained by that. And if they're a kid who likes following instructions, then showing them something super open world, like, oh, let's make a sim world together, they might find that really overwhelming and be like, but what do I do? Right? Like, what is the goal? So having some insight there can be helpful. I think a game you can play with your kid, like you mentioned Mario Kart, I think that can also be a really great friendly experience for families. And I would also say I highly encourage families to look at the accessibility settings that are available. I think that this is sort of a mentality that I think older like people who grew up as gamers, ourselves included, I think we have this sort of like, we grew up in the school of hard knocks of gaming. So like our kids have to too, right? But it is like, it will be so much more fun.
So you can simplify them? Is that actually a thing? I didn't even know this was a thing.
So
what's in there?
So they are accessibility settings, and I say them as accessibility settings because that's really what they're intended to be, to make the game more accessible to players who have access needs. And that could be because of physical limitation. Right. It could be because they have a physical disability or because they're 85 or because they're 4, right?
Yeah.
So the Switch is a great example of this. So, and many modern games now are, but for example, Mario Kart, the Switch Mario Kart, I can't speak to the Switch 2 Mario Kart, but the Switch Mario Kart 8, from your car selection menu or actually from the pause menu in any map when you're playing, you can toggle on and off different accessibility features. So one of them is that they can just use the Joy-Con as if it were a steering wheel. So they don't have to use the thumbstick. They can just turn the whole thing, which is more instinctual, obviously. Another is that you can toggle on auto acceleration so that they don't have to press A and hold A the whole time, which if you have a tiny little hand, that is really hard. And also like using a thumbstick with one hand and doing something different with another hand is also very difficult if you're young. And they also have an auto steering option that will keep them generally on the track. So I get it, that feeling of like, well, they have to learn to lose. You know what? They are going to learn to lose. Do not get me wrong. But it's going to be more fun for all of you if they are learning to lose and they're coming in third, right? Than if they're learning to lose because they're hitting a brick wall over and over again and they're in 12th, right? That's probably going to be more fun. So yeah, that's one example of those accessibility features. My kiddo and I have also played a lot of Moving Out together, which is a game about moving furniture, which I love. It's so fun. And you're moving furniture into a moving truck in all these different houses. And we've turned on all the accessibility features just so that we have more fun and we're not like arguing, right? I
Right.
want to have
Yeah.
fun. Right.
I love that suggestion. And moving is terrible. So if it's a moving simulator, yeah. So,
It's
okay. So,
cartoonish and fun. Yeah.
I mean, I'm imagining like Overcooked
It
style,
is
like
exactly.
yeah.
Yes.
So,
Very much.
Overcooked is a cooking game for those of, yeah.
Yes.
Also fun, also frustrating. Maybe it has
Yes.
accessibility settings too.
And you know what?
Um,
If you cannot afford couples counseling, play it with your partner, and that'll work some stuff out.
are you sure?
But
It'll
one way
bring
or
it
the
to the
other,
surface
right?
for sure.
Right.
So, okay.
But I want to make sure I get to the other part of your question. Sorry,
yeah,
but
yeah.
go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to ask you. So you got a kid who's playing a game too much. You're worried about it.
Right.
There's some signs that
Yeah.
maybe they're late to things. It's hard for them to stop.
Got it.
They're only talking about that thing.
Okay.
I don't know. There's just a little bit for people in that camp too.
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is that we want to make sure that we're actually worried about like problematic behavior, and that we are not perhaps bringing in some of our own misgivings or judgment into the situation. So if your kid is eat, sleep, play, everything is Zelda all the time or whatever, insert whatever game franchise here, how would you feel if they were doing the same thing but about a football team? Because if you wouldn't feel the same, if it wouldn't concern you, if it were sports or another interest, right? Birds, whatever. If it wouldn't concern you then it might not actually be the behavior. It might be the way it makes us feel when that's the only thing that they want to be interested in. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that I think it's good if kids are only interested in one thing, but it's just a way of reframing for ourselves. So, because also the reality is, especially if it's like new, right? Many people, regardless of age, adults included, when we get a new thing, a new interest, a new toy, a new hobby, or whatever, we do tend to focus on it, right? We tend to enjoy it more in the beginning because it's new and novel, and we want to actually thoroughly enjoy that thing, especially if it's something we waited a long time for. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're obsessed with it. And similarly, if I'm at work and I'm daydreaming about where I'm going to go hiking over the weekend, that doesn't mean I'm obsessed with hiking, or that doesn't mean I have like a problematic relationship with hiking. And I might spend hours researching where I'm going to go and where to park and when I should get up. And that doesn't mean my relationship with hiking is unhealthy necessarily. I think also if it's like, oh, they're struggling to stop, that also is a time to go, okay, is that because of the game, or is that because the skill of stopping is difficult? So especially with like open style games, open world games, open-ended things, a question that I got as an educator for kids working on big open-ended projects is how will you know when you're done? Or like, how will you know you're done today? Like, what will your stopping point be today? And one way I adapt that for my kid is sometimes like, hey, you have 5 minutes left. What is the last thing you're going to do today? And it's just helping them work on the executive function of stopping in the middle of something and choosing a way to stop. And that can be very hard for many people in the middle of a big project. They can't really see an off ramp. Another way to do that I've done before with students and my own family is, what's the first thing you want to do tomorrow? Like when you return to this, whether it's a project or a game, and then write it on a sticky note and like literally put it on the console. Mm-hmm. Because then it's a way of saying, you know what, you're not even losing your progress. And especially if like for neurodivergent kids, they might very foundedly feel like, but if I stop right now, I will literally not know what I'm doing tomorrow. And that is a real feeling. Like that's a real concern. So that way we can say, hey, it's right here. Tomorrow you're going to pick up right where you left off. And now we can like end more easily. If you're truly concerned that you have some problematic behavior going on, obviously speak to a medical professional, speak to a therapist, speak to a mental health provider for your child. The last thing I'll say, though, is we don't want kids to only have one way of meeting a need. So if a kid feels like the way maybe, for example, they got used to playing a game like Fortnite online with their friends during COVID because that was the way they could safely socialize with kids, right? If that is the only way that they socialize with kids, then that will also become the only way they think they can socialize. And so
Sure.
anytime they're feeling like, I want to connect with other people, if the only way that they can meet that need is playing games online, then they're going to turn to that. And then it becomes very like cyclical because then they have even more reason to think that. And
Right.
that can feel very scary. But if we can focus in and go, okay, what are they getting out of this? If they're getting a social connection component, then we might go, okay, what are some ways that I can ensure that they are also getting that need met elsewhere? So we don't have to come in and say, we're getting rid of Fortnite and we're only doing stuff in person because that will blow up. But we could say, hey, maybe it's as simple as let's invite a friend over and you play games literally in the same room to start with, right? A real baby
Sure.
step. And then maybe it's finding other in-person opportunities that they can play with friends or be on a sports league and then we can make it clear to our kids, hey, you thought you were only good at making friends in Fortnite. Turns out you're actually just really good at team activities. And that can include playing lacrosse and Fortnite and whatever. So focusing on like what is potentially being met here, what are some other ways that we can introduce this so that they have other ways of meeting that need.
Yeah. I assume there's more of this in the book too. Is that I would have to imagine this is a topic of discussion. All
Yes.
right.
Yes. I do have a
So
whole chapter that's just about like red flags and what to watch out for. So,
yeah. So if you're listening and you find yourself in that boat, that is a good place to turn to. Book is out August 26th. Did I get that date
yes,
right?
thank you. You did.
August
Yes, August
26th.
26th.
Power on. Ash, thank you so much for joining,
Thank
for
you.
sharing, for what you're doing on Instagram and everywhere else. I'm sure you're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful to be here.